So without further ado, let me introduce our morning keynote speaker, Ben Grumbles. Ben is the president of the U.S. Water Alliance, a nonprofit educational organization based in Washington, D.C. His organization is committed to uniting people and policy for what they call one water sustainability. He will talk about that in a moment or two. Previously, Ben served as Arizona's Director of Environmental Quality, and prior to that, he was an assistant administrator for water at the U.S. EPA. He also worked as a committee staff member in the U.S. House of Representatives in the past, and last night I learned that he had many interactions with Congressman Norm Dix during that period, and they were all fantastic. They were all fantastic. They all went great. He graduated from Wake Forest University, Emory Law School, and George Washington School of Law's environmental program. He lives with his family, as he told us, in the Spout Run watershed of the Potomac River. And I know everybody here knows the watershed that you live in. If you don't, Jim Cass and I are looking at each other. We better go look up our watershed because we need to know this stuff. So with that, please join me in welcoming Ben Grumbles.
Thanks, Bruce. It's a real honor to be here. I got a chance to visit a little bit with Connie, the fierce advocate for clean water, and Jason, and I just feel very much honored to be part of this Wellspring, this cluster, this hub of activity, all for good reason. And so I want to give you my perspective and talk a little bit about this national trend and the importance of coming together using technology and innovation and really making a difference. And I can't think of a better place to do that than right here on the campus. Tacoma actually is I didn't realize this until a little while ago, but I have a real strong connection to Tacoma. As I was heading up the national EPA water programs from 2003 through 2008, one awesome opportunity arose, and it was related to a ship that was built by the Tacoma Boat Building Company that the U.S. Navy had for several years, and then in 2004, the ship, the Navy was decommissioning it. And I was presented with the opportunity to create for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency a legacy other than just TMDLs and consent decrees, a beautiful ship, a monitoring vessel. And so it was reconfigured, and I think EPA folks are very proud of the fact that this ship, the OSV, Ocean Survey Vessel Bold, not only got its birth in Tacoma, but also that it applies the nation's waters and helps monitor for environmental trends and also environmental polluters. Tacoma, I also had the chance to visit for the first time last year and be part of a conference on stormwater. So I really get it that stormwater in particular is a great topic for the area and for Tacoma, the environmental community, the academic, the business community, the leaders in government to really make a difference and have a national reputation in Tacoma. We're based in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Water Alliance, and I love being in D.C. It's a wonderful city. George Will described it as a beautiful city bounded on all sides by reality. And I spend a lot of time visiting with different national organizations, with elected and appointed officials and visitors and tourists. So I have to tell you about Washington, D.C. About a decade ago, the Pope was visiting Washington, D.C. And the Pope was meeting with congressional leaders. I think this may have been when Foley was Speaker of the House. So it was a while ago. But anyway, the Pope had lost track of time and needed to get from Capitol Hill to the White House, which is about 1.5 miles. And the Pope-mobile was backed up with a lot of traffic, so the Pope got out of the Pope-mobile and hailed a cab. And I'm not making this story up. So the Pope gets in the cab, and they go for about 3 blocks, and the cab driver was driving ridiculously slow. And the Pope said, "I'm sorry, can you speed up a bit?" And he said, "You know, I've gotten 2 speeding tickets just in the last 3 days. I cannot afford to get a 3rd speeding ticket." So the Pope said, "That's okay, pull over and I'll drive." So the cab driver gets in the back seat, and the Pope, no, you're shaking your head, this is true. The Pope is driving the cab, goes past 11th Street, past the Archives building, is getting really close to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, is going significantly above the speed limit. Sure enough, the blue lights flash, the DC's finest stop, pull him over. The cop walks up, looks in the cab, steps back, calls his precinct captain. Says, "Captain, we've got ourselves an issue. We've got a VIP situation here." And the precinct captain says, well, who is it? Is it a senator? No, I don't think so. Is it a member of the cabinet? No, I don't think so. Well, who is it? I don't know, but the Pope is driving him. I love that story because, you know, in Washington, well, everywhere, but particularly in Washington, D.C., it's really hard. That's not me, by the way. It's really hard to figure out who's driving the show and what factors are driving policy. And it's just sometimes things they don't look, and they aren't, reality isn't what it is perceived to be. And what I want to talk about in a little bit of time, before you really get immersed in some of the experts and the detailed discussion, I want to talk about drivers for innovation and the big picture nationally. I won't get into it globally, but I would just agree with the Chancellor and the Commissioner that globally water is, you know, in conjunction with climate change, is becoming the major topic for the future. And around the world, but definitely in the United States, enormous opportunity. So I'm going to talk about some of the drivers for innovation and technology with a pretty heavy focus on stormwater, obviously, since this is the place to be for stormwater. And, you know, sometimes the explorers and entrepreneurs really do need to look at things in a different way. Although sometimes we get fixated on something and miss the bigger picture. The U.S. Water Alliance, this is this unique organization that I'm proud to be part of. The U.S. Water Alliance is not a trade association. It is a really big national cluster of thought leaders and innovators who are really ready to move the country towards a national water vision. Of a greater focus on integration and innovation and educating the public to try to bring together, to really change the way people view, value, and manage water. And the best way to do that, for us, we don't lobby. What we do is we help convene meaningful discussions, policymakers, decision makers, thought leaders, to move that ball forward, to really spark innovation and change and shift paradigms. And so we have a very broad membership, and we try to tackle the really big issues by having local leaders, watershed-driven expertise inform at a national level on a national stage. And just to put one more point on this, we all, within the U.S. Water Alliance, the membership of the Alliance, we truly believe that the 3 biggest threats facing America when it comes to water are the fact, first of all, the threat that water is invisible. It's forgotten and it's taken for granted. And people tend to take advantage of that. We all have issues in our daily lives. We don't want to have to worry about turning on the tap or where the water goes when we flush the toilet. The irony, though, is that the more thoughtful and innovative we become as a society, we really will have people thinking about and appreciating our source water and the system that takes water away. I like to spend a fair amount of time in environmental education and with kids, and I'm really excited in one school where the teachers it's not just teaching second graders their zip codes, it's teaching them their drip codes. What's the hydrologic unit? Where does the water come from? It helps connect the dots and the drops. And as we get into the energy-water nexus, you can add the watts to that equation as well. But one of the things that we're involved in is a new coalition, a national campaign to help put out on the center stage for the nation how water is increasingly becoming the real risk, the crisis stage in communities around the country. So it's a Value of Water coalition to try to help shift the perception of water from being invisible to invaluable. And everyone who is serious about sustainability and the future of water knows this fundamental point that the value of water is you have to have a price for water that in some way begins to resemble reality. And when I was in Arizona, not having to run for election, but instead being an appointed official, I could go around saying the era of cheap water is over. We have to be compassionate about pricing, but we really do need to move towards full cost pricing. There has to be a social safety net because water is not simply a commodity, water is a fundamental human right. But the fundamental point about valuing water and moving it from being invisible to valued and conserved and respected is doing serious work on the policy front and for pricing. And it's not just the economists, it's also the political scientists and the local leaders. The second big threat, though, besides the fact that water is invaluable, it's invisible and it's taken for granted, is the fragmentation and fracturing of the policies and programs. And we're not naive in the U.S. Water Alliance, and I don't think anyone in this room is naive enough to think that, well, the solution is just one big holistic approach, one water czar in an area who deals with all the water issues. The reality is, as we try to move towards one water management, integrated and holistic water management, is that we're a nation of laws and people and programs and agencies, and there's a reason, historical or personality-driven, why we have different bureaus and agencies and different laws that segregate. And what we try to do is, we'll at least get all the different players in a locality in the same room together. And in this era of tight budgets and the absolute imperative of becoming more efficient and effective and equitable, magic can happen when you bring together the drinking water person with the stormwater person or the person in charge of forestry management upstream. I love the U.S. Department of Agriculture's program called Forests to Faucets. And it's about stewardship upstream in the forests and the watersheds to help reduce the drinking water treatment costs downstream. But the fragmentation is legendary. We're not the only country in the world. We have a lot to be proud of, our approach to water throughout the nation compared to some other countries, but we still are horribly fragmented, and we have different agencies, and not just at the federal level, at the local level. Great synergy can occur when you move towards one management, one water management. Great examples of that on the stormwater front. When I was at EPA, heading up the National Water Program for the U.S. EPA in 2003, 2004, we began to really see the enthusiasm for green infrastructure, this movement of and low-impact development of slow it down, spread it out, soak it in. Well, one of the perfect examples of the fragmentation is the difference between the Safe Drinking Water Act's Underground Injection Control Permitting Program and the Clean Water Act's 402P Stormwater Program. Some communities could see real value and benefit to slowing it down, spreading it out, soaking it in. Well, on the soaking it in part, the infiltration under the ground, suddenly you go from the Clean Water Act surface stormwater permitting realm to the drinking water underground injection control permitting program. You may not need an act of Congress, but it certainly is a step in the right direction to have the two programs talking together and saying, well, what are the bigger risks? Sometimes you can reach a really good outcome if you've got the left hand and the right hand communicating together, even shaking hands from time to time. So One Water, integrated water management, takes time, but it's happening around the country. Lots of examples to share with you of that. I see it in your own backyard, but that is one at the national level that also needs to work, and we need to get more serious about it. And then the third one, which is really the focus of the discussion this morning, and I think as you get into the nitty-gritty of stormwater, and that is innovation. I am so proud to be part of the water world and the water policy arena, but I have to say that the water sector is one of the most conservative and resistant to change that I've ever seen. And it's the reality of the lawyers and the engineers. Many utilities are very hesitant to change paradigms, like shifting from the gray infrastructure to more green infrastructure. There are tremendous risks involved in that. There are legal risks, there are financial risks. How many trees does it take to filter out the pollutants? How many years will it take? Will the environmental community that has an important role of helping to enforce the Clean Water Act, how tolerant will they be? But there are all kinds of different innovations that we really need to tackle, and that's why the U.S. Water Alliance, with cities and businesses and some universities around the country, are focused in on shifting paradigms, the paradigm shift from gray infrastructure to green infrastructure. Not 100% green in lieu of gray, but finding the right balance and doing more and more green infrastructure. Another example of the paradigm shift in innovation is bringing in more public-private partnerships, infuse more of the money, private sector money, without losing the public's trust and accountability when it comes to water. The paradigm shift, one of my favorites, which I'm seeing happen around the country slowly, is changing the way we view and manage wastewater utilities so that instead of being treat and discharge facilities, they are literally centers of regeneration. They're green factories. Whether it's the biogas that is used, instead of flaring it, wasting it, using it to generate electricity, to either run the operations of the facility or to even sell that electricity back to the grid, mining the sewers, to recovering the valuable ingredients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the ammonia. Urine harvesting, which is something I learned about at a university in North Carolina. They're doing some cutting-edge research on really segregating, just like we do on the recyclable use. I like to say there is no such thing as wastewater, just wasted water. And the more students and business leaders and governmental officials recognize that and are willing to innovate, we can really take off and go places and move towards fishable, swimmable, drinkable, the lofty, worthy goals of the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. On innovation, let me just mention a couple things. We held a national forum in Washington, D.C. in March, where the water and wastewater equipment manufacturers and the U.S. Water Alliance pulled together about 60 people from state and local government, regulators, utility managers, EPA officials in the water program, the research program, environmental community, land use planners, green building council type folks to come and talk about what are the biggest obstacles to innovation. In other words, how do you drive innovation when it comes to water technology? And it was very interesting to me that one of the first points and barriers that was listed and agreed upon from everybody, including some of the business entrepreneurs who were in the meeting, was pricing of water. If water is not appropriately valued, if people don't value the clean water, the safe water enough, then it can be very hard to identify a value proposition in developing a special type of technology or purpose. But the whole pricing issue is one of the barriers. Another barrier was procurement, local procurement. When we had our workshop, the U.S. Conference of Mayors released a report. I don't have the website address for it, but it's worth reading. It's a very interesting report about how in cities across America, the local procurement decisions are very worthy of reform. That whether you're trying to choose what type of pipe, whether it's cast iron or ductile iron or PVC pipe, a lot of times the decision is just simply keep going with what you've done in the past. It's not based on a full-bodied review of the most effective and price-conscientious and cost-effective solution. And obviously that's not something that a think tank or a single group is going to resolve. But the more there's a national spotlight on the need for cities to really take a closer look at their procurement practices, we'll get further along towards clean, safe, and affordable water with better technologies. But maybe the barrier to innovation that generated the most attention during this workshop was the whole challenge of technology verification and then reciprocity among many different jurisdictions, the patchwork quilt approach. And I know many of you are fully immersed in that challenge, and I think universities and clusters around the country offer a real opportunity to find some regional reciprocity, to also help push the national leaders, such as the national EPA, on what to do in the generation after the Environmental Technology Verification Program, which is now resting in peace. But that whole issue of having some meaningful process at the federal level, but also working with the state level, to have some type of verification of new technologies that doesn't require 50 different verifications among the 50 different states. You know, some of the conservative people in Washington, D.C. who are focused on federalism talk about the importance of states as laboratories of democracy, and that the federalism means 50 shades of freedom. I think that's a very clever way of talking about the topic, but on the topic of new technologies, we don't want 50 shades of verification and approval. There needs to be a more rational approach to that, and it needs some national leadership. And I know EPA is real interested in that. In fact, after that workshop, they soon released their blueprint on water technology and innovation. And I think it's a great document. It's written for the layman, but it lays out some 10 of the most important needs in innovation when it comes to water and wastewater and stormwater technology, from reuse of fracking water to more cost-effective ways to manage stormwater, to carbon sequestration and capture and sequestration, which definitely has a strong water component to it, it's worth looking at. And it's EPA's Office of Water, their blueprint for water technology innovation. So the short amount of time I have left, what I'd really like to do is focus on green infrastructure and stormwater a bit, and then tell you a little bit about a couple other innovation areas. So maybe before talking about green infrastructure, let me just say a few things about stormwater. Because the stormwater, the regulatory, as I was saying at the beginning, they're drivers besides the Pope. There are all kinds of drivers for different movements. And there's clearly a regulatory driver on stormwater. It's far more than just a regulatory driver, such as EPA. But I will say this, that when I was a staffer working in the House of Representatives in the 80s, I got a chance to work on the landmark reauthorization of the Clean Water Act, which is a remarkable experience, when there's enough functionality in the institution to really get major bipartisan legislation through. And I was right there in the room on the final day in 1986, when after a year and a half of battling between the House and the Senate conferees on the Clean Water Act reauthorization, and we had gone from about 100 issues down to the final 2. The next to last issue was resolved, and it involved the Clean Water Act State Revolving Fund allotment formula, which, as you can imagine, the senators and the members from California and Texas and New York, they really cared about what that allotment formula was for the new SRF capitalization grants. But that got resolved, including a take-home project called in Boston for Tip O'Neill. And the last issue, the very last issue, was how to resolve the stormwater controversy that was brewing over the last 8 years, and to put the finishing touches on the Clean Water Act Section 402P program. And it really did boil down to those questions of what the heck does MEP, maximum extent practicable, mean for the cities? How do you phase in the tiered approach to stormwater regulation, the big cities, the smaller cities? What the heck does associated with industrial activity mean, which is the whole stormwater permitting program beyond the municipal? And everybody finally, the members had left to go catch the flights, and they left it to the staff to work out those final issues because they were done. And they wrapped it up, and then the legislation eventually went to the president. President Reagan vetoed the Clean Water Act bill. Then the Congress came back after Christmas, and it was introduced as H.R. 1 and S1 and sent to the president again. He vetoed it again, and they overrode it. And to this day, having been involved in the stormwater regulatory program, some of the folks have said to me, Grumbles, you've been involved in the stormwater program from its infancy to its adultery. And I've seen, in following through on the stormwater regulatory program, I can't emphasize enough the importance of business and state and local regulators working together to figure out and help inform EPA on these very tricky issues about numeric standards and how do you have a manageable national program recognizing that weather is different, and the ability to control land use in a local area is truly different from factory discharges or predictable municipal sewage treatment plant discharges. The great movement I see around the country is a realistic, a pragmatic, but vigorous move towards green infrastructure. And that's partly to come up with a more cost-effective way to manage stormwater and prevent sewer overflows. But also it's a way to get all these multiple benefits in an era of climate change, the urban heat island effect. So you've got here and around the country, increasing examples where cities are rediscovering the urban canopy and are looking to the rooftops as new frontier to not just reduce the heating costs of the building, but to beautify the environment and to capture stormwater and manage it more appropriately. The towers on the right, I think, are a figment of one's imagination. But there are movements towards living walls. It's not just rooftops and rain gardens. Great opportunities sprouting up literally all around. And I think the important point that the technicians, the pragmatic people, the engineers know is it's got to work. There are reasons that green infrastructure isn't always the first solution. There are a whole bunch of different types of barriers, potential barriers, and a track record that needs to be developed, and picking the right vegetation. This might come up later throughout the day when we're talking about climate adaptation and stormwater and water, but I see around the country now an increasing conflict where the water utilities are not coordinating closely enough with the power utilities, and as the well-meaning water and wastewater and stormwater utilities are greening the urban environment, planting the trees, beautifying the community which the citizens love, there is that potential, particularly as extreme weather comes, where people suddenly become outraged because of the loss of power due to vegetation, trees falling on power lines. So this increasing trend towards undergrounding, on the one hand, daylighting buried streams and rivers, but also putting power lines and utility lines underground, given the realities in areas of the country for increasing examples of extreme weather. But green infrastructure, I can give you examples, Philadelphia, around the whole country, where real innovation is occurring. In fact, let me just mention one and move on to the others. For a lot of people how many people have heard about the green infrastructure story in Philadelphia? Yeah. It's becoming widely publicized, and here's what's good about it. Disclosure here, the vice chairman of the U.S. Water Alliance also happens to be the water commissioner in Philadelphia, and he convinced the mayor of Philadelphia to bring the environmental community together with the business community and the water and wastewater utilities and say no to EPA. And EPA was doing the right thing in terms of legally saying you have unexcusable sewer overflow discharges. You're going to have to invest billions of dollars in controlling those sewer overflows, and that means deep tunnels. And the city put a lot of work into a true collaboration with the support of the environmental community. They came up with an alternative to building another massive deep tunnel underground solution. And the outrageous solution was varied, many different parts of it, but the basic point was change the landscape of Philadelphia, use green infrastructure so that a third of the surface space in the city was green, and work with the regulators, make sure they provide flexibility with accountability, and ultimately the state and the EPA have signed off on this kind of a leap of faith by not going with the more proven, expensive deep tunnel and instead putting $1.8 billion in a urban greening experiment that is not just a one-shot deal, it's a sustainable collaboration. And there are other cities and metropolitan areas around the country that are also seeing the ability to save energy and lots of money by blending in more green infrastructure in lieu of gray. It's a great example of technology innovation. There are also great examples of stormwater technology innovation using different practices, not just relying on physical separation, but using biological systems and using different equipment. I love some of the exhibitors, their demonstrations using compost or other types of materials to soak up the pollutants, whether it's nutrients or metals or pathogen bacteria. But the green infrastructure movement is a really important one, and just let me touch on a couple more. So, nationally, we know this. Nationally, stormwater is one of the greatest challenges and one of the most difficult to manage and to figure ways, since we've picked much of the low-hanging fruit in dealing with point source discharges from wastewater treatment plants and factories. So stormwater is one of the big problems. When you look at the different types of stressors, the reality is that nutrient loadings, over half of the nation's streams are impaired due to nutrients. Too much of a good thing. An intimate relationship with land use and how we manage the land, how we grow crops, diffuse sources of pollution. It all adds up to a wicked problem that needs really thoughtful and collaborative solutions, and innovative ones. And so spreading around the country, I shouldn't use the word spreading when I'm talking about manure and excess nutrients, but around the country, this water quality trading innovation is beginning to pick up steam. And what the U.S. Water Alliance is trying to do as an honest broker is bring in the environmental community and agriculture and the wastewater and stormwater utilities and the regulators to build upon and improve upon the 2003 water quality trading policy that the U.S. EPA issued. And the best example, one of them, is in Medford, Oregon, the Freshwater Trust. Anybody familiar with the Freshwater Trust? You should be. Go to their website. The Freshwater Trust is a non-profit organization that brings together the energy sector and agriculture and wastewater utilities and tries to come up with the most effective solutions to reduce thermal TMDL problems where the river segment is impaired due to temperature loadings, and working with farmers, working with property owners to grow more trees, provide more shade, and meticulously account for those ecosystem services, and be able to demonstrate to the regulators that that's the most cost-effective way to go forward, rather than building new expensive chillers at the power plant or the wastewater plant. So nutrient trading is one of the really big trends. There are questions, often stormwater is a part of the trading discussion. How do you allow for nutrient trading? How do you provide innovative partnerships in managing stormwater? And the last one I'll mention is innovative finance. We have got to wake up to the fact that public finance alone cannot be the solution to our growing water and wastewater infrastructure challenge. I am a huge fan of public sector organizations and public works. I worked on a committee called the Public Works and Transportation Committee in Congress. I'm also a big fan of the public trust doctrine, that there are certain things, clean air, clean water, that are inalienable, that shouldn't be sold to the private sector to make a profit from. But here's the rub. The public trust doctrine can become the public rust doctrine if there are communities that are going out of business because the taxpayers, the ratepayers, are fed up and won't provide any more public funds for water and wastewater infrastructure. You've got to get serious about bringing in partners such in the private sector to come up with money and a more effective way to move forward, without losing sight of the fact that the water system is still a public interest. It's a public trust. So you have to have public accountability. So in cities like Rialto, California, and Bayonne, New Jersey, they just recently reached these public-private partnership agreements, leased concessions where private sector entities, whether it's United Water or Veolia Water, run the facilities, the water and wastewater utility. They maintain it, they operate it, but it's still held in ownership by the public, by the local government, and they're still accountable for the rates, but there's some business know-how put into that process to jumpstart the infrastructure investment so that we don't have a crisis. So that's another example of innovation, and in the stormwater arena, it's being used in Philadelphia. What somebody might say it's a rainwater tax, but as part of the deal in Philadelphia to green the city and use low-impact development rather than building a $2 billion deep tunnel, we're going to have to impose stormwater fees that are based on the impervious surface areas of the properties. And for some businesses, that means suddenly a significantly increased stormwater fee. And the politics of that are hard. So what do? You come up with an innovative approach that says, okay, you're going to be paying a bigger fee, a lot more than you used to, based on the amount of impervious surface area in your property, Mr. Business. But we're going to allow you the flexibility to do off-site mitigation and get credit for it, different ways to reduce that fee by doing community projects that the regulatory agency signs off on. So that's another example of innovation. And then just the last thing is really what I feel this whole event is about today, and increasingly around the country. And that is, how do you create clusters, hubs for water technology and innovation that really spark change and movement in the right direction? I mentioned the EPA effort. A few years ago, they launched a water technology cluster. They call it Confluence. It's based in Cincinnati, Ohio, which also happens to be where the University of Cincinnati is, and it also happens to be where EPA's National Research Lab is located. And there are businesses there, and the city has been facing huge price tags for their sewer overflow control plan. And so their effort, their Confluence, they call it, their cluster, is all about coming up with technology solutions, working out some type of a regional reciprocity program for verification of those technologies, and getting the regulators and the educators and the innovators in the same room together. And this is happening in areas around the country. And I'm really encouraged by the enthusiasm in Tacoma. I went to the WEFTech event in Chicago a few weeks ago, 20,000 people, the largest trade show, water quality professionals around the country. And I was looking for a place to sit to make a phone call, and I sit at this table, and it has this Tacoma Urban Waters Water Works Here handout that Bill Stewart had left, sharing insights with people about the opportunities for a cluster and for a confluence here in the Tacoma area. And why is it important? It's important because there's a need to have a center where you use the natural capital. Water is such an amazing resource here, where you use the financial capital, a business community, an economic development agency, organization that's really committed to moving forward in the right direction. Intellectual capital, a great university system, a system in Tacoma that's growing, students and educators providing that intellectual capital for today and tomorrow and the next generation of water leaders. And finally, political capital, where local leaders, whether it's the leader of a port or of the local government, recognize that we have a real opportunity here. So you have a real opportunity here. I really Hope that you get the most out of this Wellspring 2013 and that it grows even more, and that there's going to be a big blue circle up in the Tacoma area in the next couple of years. And I look forward to interacting with all of you. Thank you very much.